Hi everyone, welcome. What's all this clutter out here on my bench, you ask? Well, some of you might already recognize some of the things that you see out here and know exactly what I'm preparing for. Well, let me just summarize. I'm going to be building a couple new bins, and that's what these two empty trays are for here. The material that's going in there is this nice batch of fresh bedding that I prepared. At this point, how long has it been? I've got stats to share with you. Here we go, 24 days. Since I prepared that batch of bedding. It's at the very end there. I listed the bedding prep for their new home, but this provides details about the systems that we're checking in on today. Basically, we're doing the haul out. The haul out of the worms that have been migrating for the past 25 days. These are African nightcrawler worms. On day 325, on day 300 was when we initiated their migration after 69 days of foraging. And all that was preceded by 231 days of everyday composting. These worms, I don't know, they were a little bit reluctant to exit their material. And they're the worms that live in those two black trays on the top shelf there. The material that they're inhabiting, or were inhabiting, was quite damp. When the material's nice and damp and cozy, there's usually a pretty good chance that the worms are really not too interested in leaving or getting out of it. So in order to make that stuff dry a little bit more quickly than just leaving it to be exposed to the air and dry naturally, I kind of stacked the deck in our favor. So all you got to do is look up here. I've not yet put away the fan that was pointing down onto these systems for only the period of maybe a couple days. By the third day, I was already putting the plastic out on top to prevent further drying, but still allowing a little bit of the material to be exposed to the blowing air. And daily aeration. So over those 3 days, that material out there dried really rapidly, and almost as quickly as it dried, the worms bugged out. So at this point, we've got very few worms remaining in that stuff out there. Almost all of them have made their way into the horizontal migration feeding zones. So I think we're ready for haul out. So after all that intro, let's get to work. Oh yeah, well, I got some prep work to do on the bench. We'll get to this when the fun begins, when the haul out begins. So I'll be back soon, and we'll be back on the bench, cleaned up, ready to go, and hook these little guys up with their new home. Let's get started. All right, flash forward. We've got the systems out on the bench, ready for haul out, and you might remember this was one of the things that was cluttering the table earlier, but we didn't talk too much about it. We talked more about the prep and the feeding of the new environments, but this is really going to be used to combine the leftovers. After we do the haul out of the horizontal migration feeding zones, what will be left is the lovely vermicompost that these little guys have been producing for us over the past 325 days. And this bin that I've got is a little bit larger than the normal bins that I use. So in most cases, I'm able to take the vermicompost from two systems, place it in here so that the material can be depopulated even further, because even though I believe we've probably got in excess of 95% of the worms over in the feeding zones, we're definitely not 100% depopulated, or at least yesterday when I was in here to aerate, I still saw worms in here. So my guess is that it will pay off to set up a bait box and let this material sit out there for a little while longer to see if we can round up stragglers. But I'll tell you, the last time I had that happen, the last two retired systems that I brought to an end not too long ago, I tried doing some baiting of worms to round up stragglers, but I somehow didn't manage to collect any. So I don't know how that is possible, but I guess the only conclusion to draw is that it was in fact a 100% perfect depopulation of the vermicompost, requiring no gathering of stragglers in the end. So you could see a worm or two right here on the edge, which is certainly not unusual, right there on the boundary of the feeding zone and the vermicompost. And as I encounter a couple here and there, I have that option to just pick them up and put them where I'd really like them to be, rather than all the way out here out in the vermicompost. But like I said, we're going to be attempting to round up stragglers, so we don't have to be overly precise with this, even though I had no luck rounding up stragglers in the last similar situation. I'm not abandoning the practice, because even though we've not seen too many worms out here in the material, and even though the ones we have seen so far have already been plucked out and kept with the rest of the gang, I think we can almost be guaranteed that out here we're probably still going to have a worm or two. Like right there I see a little wormy. And at this point I'm not going to proceed with continuing to pick them out, but these are the stragglers, and yeah, we're not going to have many, but still, I'm in no hurry to get the vermicompost into service, so I'm okay doing it that way. You know, let me put the box down, because I'm still going to do the same here, as kind of segment the vermicompost that we're harvesting basically at this point, with the exception of the pause and delay we're going to bake in for the rounding up of stragglers. It just seems like it's going to make it a little less complicated when it comes time to do the haul out. We don't have to be so worried about contaminating our lovely vermicompost over here with any of that material that was used to build the migration feeding zones. So I have once again picked out a worm or two to keep them with the rest of the bunch that we're hauling out now, but here too it's fair to assume that we're going to have stragglers, and perhaps this guy right here will be the last one I pick out. But I'm sure if we were to probe down deep, right there's another little one, here's another one. Those are our stragglers in bin number 2 that we're going to be trying to collect up. And like I usually do, I'm not really going to include any of that in the video. That's all kind of stuff I do off camera. It's not all that interesting watching just a bunch of this material getting poured from 2 boxes into one, and then a bait box placed on top of it. At some point in the near future, when we believe we've got the population of stragglers together, we'll certainly bring them back into the game and reintroduce them into the main population that's getting moved out today. So here's some nice cardboard that we can include in the new systems as bedding or whatever we decide to use it as. Here too, some larger chunks of paper and stuff like that that we can exclude, and then what should remain is all fairly small particle matter stuff, leftover bedding and food over here in the horizontal migration feeding zone, as well as 25 days worth of castings that the worms have produced in here. Oh boy, okay. Well, just attempting to shake any worms loose from this cardboard before I pull it out of here, although I'm folding it over in such a way that allows the worms to remain on it and in it comfortably. But I think it's time to get the haul out of bin number 1 started here. So as I usually do, I'll be turning to you guys to share your thoughts on how many worms we're talking about here. So besides the haul out right now, which will offer a nice opportunity to see how many worms we're going to be placing into the new bin number 1, we'll also have the release of the worms, at which point we can also get a glimpse of how many there are, to try to size up the estimate that each of us has for the population. So I'll be turning to you guys at the end for sure to ask that you write a comment to let me know how many worms you believe we populated each of my new systems with today. But for now, it's really just focusing on getting all these little wormies out into our transport box here. And it does feel like we're going to have enough space in here. Sometimes I worry about not having enough room in these transport containers to do an entire haul out, because sometimes my feeding zones are pretty good sized. And from what I remember, we built these horizontal migration feeding zones to be pretty big too. I'm definitely seeing, you know, a good number of mature worms, but I see lots of babies here too. And it's interesting how right here in this corner, at the very end, we managed to encounter a somewhat more prominent worm ball than we usually see. So let's just gawk at these little guys for a moment or two before we conclude the haul out of bin number 1. And then we can get to hauling out bin number 2. Well, it's always fun getting a good close look at a handful of wormies, but let's not allow ourselves to get too distracted. Let's keep the tempo moving here and try to get the job done without wasting too much time on frivolities and geeking around and checking out the wormies. Here too, a lot of these little worms down in the very low reaches, some of them stuck to the side of the bin. Some of them are absolute babies, like I don't even know how to describe them. In the past I'd used the analogy of an eyelash, how small some of these worms can be. Perhaps none of the ones I just pulled out here are quite that small, although a couple of them might be. And those are the ones I'm not anticipating being able to pick out this way, so let's not spend any more time on trying. I do want to make sure that they're not stuck out here on the walls though, because as this stuff dries quite rapidly, hopefully it wouldn't leave any of these little guys stranded up on the walls. But then again, this material is not going to remain in this box for long. Like I said, it's going to be emptied into that slightly larger box where we're going to conduct the rounding up of the stragglers. But in a lot of cases, people would consider this as already usable as is, as vermicompost, despite the fact that there's some stragglers in it. Some people would just consider it as a bonus for the garden, that it gets a few additional wormies to help aerate and make the material out in the garden even that much more nice. So either way, I prefer to try to round them all up as best I can. But I think that first handful was a little bit difficult to see how many worms we ended up with. I probably could have done a better job. The other container's a little bit better for giving us visibility into what we're putting in it. I think if I were to turn it upside down and just kind of upturn it a little bit so we can see and get a general idea of how many worms are in it, then your comments will hopefully provide estimates that are going to help us come up with a good, interesting, averaged, estimated population for these new systems. So, every now and then when I run my fingers through the material, I can feel kind of a hot spot where there seems to be a good many worms hanging out. Here too, the mix of worms is pretty awesome. Lots of baby worms, and boy oh boy, we're running out of room fast here. Just interesting how sometimes the last couple handfuls are among the most interesting. And here too, I'm finding it that last corner, for some reason, is just loaded with worms. Impossible to imagine that they all managed to round up together in some way here. Trying to outrun my haul out effort. It just seems like for some reason that corner is a popular one, it seems. I don't know. But yeah, look at all those worms. Alright, we better get the show on the road here and get this job completed. But yeah, we're definitely out of space in this transport container. Let's get this last handful in there carefully without spilling it all over the place. And now I believe we're at the point that we can proceed to the release of these new wormies into their new home. Their new homes were built in that little pause between this scene and the previous. So they're all set to go. It's really just a matter of getting these bins out of the way, bringing out the new systems, and dropping the wormies into their new homes. So here too you can see very few wormies, but a lot of these little babies stuck to the wall. Hopefully we'll be able to lure them out in the baiting process and get them all rounded up as stragglers. So on to the release of the worms into their new home. Let's make that happen next. So the dampening of the material in the bins is the final step. I dumped in all that prepared bedding that I made what was it, 24 days ago? And then in came all that delicious food I bought down here for them. Complemented with some bedding, not bedding. Complemented with some grit. I even threw some mosquito dunks in here, but we're not here to talk about how I build my worm bins. We're here to release worms and to gawk at their numbers. And that's what I'm really interested in hearing. I'm dying to hear what everyone's got to say in terms of how many worms we're launching these 2 new bins with. So please check out what we've got going on here. Leave a comment and let me know how many worms are going into each system. If it's an equal amount, just let me know. But if you have a specific estimate for how many worms just went into bin number 1 here, please let me know how many that were. And over here in bin number 2, similarly, if it's a number different from what you think populates bin number 1, then let me know how many you think just went into here. To help you get a better look at what's going on, I'll try to spread things out here really quick, and then I'll step aside and let them get busy and acclimating to their new home. Hopefully they enjoy the environment we've created for them, and hopefully they enjoy the yummy meal we laid out for them. Okay, remember to comment. Looking forward to hearing what everyone says. Boy, oh boy, they sure squirm out of you quickly, don't they? So I've got some more stuff that came over with these little guys. You'll remember this. There was the feeding zone indicator over the horizontal migration feeding zone, this. And there was this cardboard, the horizontal migration feeding zone's little partition. We wouldn't want to leave something like this behind because chances are it's probably got a bunch of wormies tucked away in between the layers. So, oh, here, it's coming apart pretty readily. Okay, I thought there'd be more down in here. But this is all stuff that, as far as I'm concerned, belongs to this batch of wormies, so let them keep it and let them continue working it down. And the feeding zone indicator is even kind of in the right spot here, because when I built these bins, I did put the food down the middle for the most part. Not in a trench though, the way I often do. Well, it was more or less a trench because it did go almost all the way to the edge on both sides. But I made it much wider and a little shallower than I normally would because I don't have a great deal of depth here in these systems. I figured I'd start out kind of modest, but then again, once the worms start working this stuff down, it all collapses down. What's kind of fluffed up and airy and taking up a good amount of volume now would certainly be reduced to something much, much less in a fairly short period of time by these little guys. But future check-ins will all include bedding with their future feedings. So here too, I somehow imagined the layers between the cardboard sheets as being a little bit more popular with worms tucked away in there, but I didn't really see any. I guess that's one of those little wives' tales myths that worm keepers tend to talk themselves into the fact that, oh yeah, there's probably worms all over the place. But well, here, I guess maybe we do have some evidence of worms taking advantage of the space in between. I don't know. What I've heard was that they like the taste of the glue. I guess maybe it's some sort of a flour water mixture, a simple type of glue that might be used to assemble cardboard. I don't know for sure, but whatever it is, I think some people believe that worms like the flavor of this stuff. So it's realistic to think that that might be true. But we're pretty much done here. We're going to come on now with a couple nice sheets of newspaper that I set aside for this job, and then the plastic bubble wrap that had been helping out to keep the horizontal migration feeding zones covered up nicely, are these larger ones that also even have a couple worms coming along for the ride here. Going to come back on and help keep the system hang on to its moisture content and not let all of it evaporate away. A lot of it will probably escape around the edges, but not enough to be of any concern. The majority of the system will stay nice and cozy for these worms. The bedding was nice and damp when we created it. The foods that we put in there frozen are going to be thawing out, expelling moisture. Heck, I even poured a little standing water into the bottom of each bin before I built each system. So I think we've created a nice home for these little guys. And don't worry, I'm going to be checking here to make sure no stragglers were left behind. That'll be part of my homework, as will the emptying of their old homes, the container in their old homes, and setting up a bait box. But here, before the end of this check-in, we have one more thing to do, and I think a lot of you know what that is. Let's get on with that. Right here, attached to my Sharpie pen, are the labels for our two newest systems here in the wormery. So everyone, please join me in welcoming the two newest systems in my wormery, the African nightcrawlers. I've never tried applying the stickers this way, by the way. But it seemed like a way to try it since I was doing this single-handed, and alright, whatever. Good enough. I guess there's a certain amount of charm to a sticker put on crooked. So that's it for the migration, everyone. I've got homework. I've got to empty the material in the finished systems into that one collection area. We're going to see if we can use the bait box to gather up stragglers, at which point they'll be reunited with these little guys who knows when in the future. And, well, don't forget to comment. I'm really looking forward to hearing how many worms did we just release into bins number 1, bin number 2. Please leave a comment. Let me know. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.